for this live session. So the first thing on our agenda is what is backend. So I will try as much as possible to break the concept of backend down for you guys to understand, and then we are going to proceed into understanding what RESTful API is all about, and then we are going to look into Hoppscotch. Hoppscotch is a beautiful open source API testing tool, and I'm also going to be walking you through why you should care about it and how you can use it. And then we are going to move on to the to one of the most fun part of today, where I'll be showing you what we'll be building, and then finally we will go into our coding time. So the first thing we'll look into is what is backend. So on my slide there, backend is the code that runs on the server. So imagine most of our codes runs on the browser, right? Now, how do we run our code outside of the browser? So any code that runs outside of the browser is what we call server side. So, and backend is the code that runs on the server, and this code contains logics. So logics might be like functions that we write in JavaScript, Python. So backend contains logics, and these logics receive requests from the client side, which is the front end. So basically, we have a front end that is communicating to the back end, and the logic that we have in the back end is going to help us and retrieve requests from the front end. And the back end is going to process the request and send the appropriate data back to the client. So the backend receives requests, and after receiving the request, it's going to process it based on the logic that you, as a backend developer, has defined already, and then you want to send the appropriate data back to the front end. So when we are talking about appropriate data, data can be like an object, it can be like a sentence, like a string that we are sending back, just to notify the front end about what has happened at the back end. So if a request comes, there are two things involved. Is either the request is successful or the request failed. So the backend should be able to send back a successful request or a bad request. Like tell the front end that the request you made has been successful or the request you made is bad and we cannot process it. So and also backend includes database, which will persistently store, retrieve, update, and do something with the data received. So when the front end sends a data to the backend can decide to store this data to the database if you require the data to be stored in the database. So the storing of data, retrieving of data, manipulation of data is being done by the backend logics. What do we mean by APIs? What is RESTful? So REST stands for Representational State Transfer and was created by computer scientist Roy Fiddy Google, so you can learn more about what it's all about. So REST is an architecture in which you can use to build an API. So RESTful API is not the only way that we can create an API. We have SOAP too, but REST API tends to provide more more efficient ways of doing things when it comes to APIs. So RESTful API is an architecture that we can use to build an API. So and our API stands for Application Programming Interface. So what does an API? What do we do with an API as a backend developer and as a front-end developer? So these APIs allows two or more applications to talk to each other. This is one reason that I got into programming, that I have to study computer science. I decided to go into tech. When my teacher said, do you know that computers can talk to one another? And I was like, computers can talk to one another? Then I want to know how they talk to one another. And today I find myself working with computers and making computers communicate to one another. So softwares can communicate to one another using APIs. The front end is a software, the back end is a software, and they can communicate to one another. They can share data. They can manipulate data between one another through the help of APIs. Facebook also uses API. So it is not that you use APIs for small projects. Big projects also use APIs. Anywhere there is a software where there is a front end, there's a back end. API can be integrated. Your operating system can also use API. So as long as you have a software that you can integrate an API to that can communicate, then API can actually work there. So you can see here that API can be used on the web, mobile, database, hardware, and operating system. So you can use your API anywhere you want. So as a backend developer, when you create a backend, your mobile send out your API to a mobile developer to consume your API. You can give it to a front-end developer to consume the API. They can integrate it with an hardware or an operating system like Windows, Linux, and so on. And that is looking at the REST API architecture. So this is basically what is going on in a full stack application. So when I mean a full stack application, I mean the front end, combination of the front end and the back end. So as you can see here, we have different REST clients. We have the Android app, we have the iPhone app, we have the browser, and we have the web. Now, and by the left, we have our server. This is our server, which is the back end, and this is our front end. So how do we exchange data? That's where our API comes in. So REST API allows the front end and the back end to communicate with each other using HTTP methods. And these HTTP methods, we have the delete, which you can delete data from the database. You can put data, which means you can change a particular entry in the database. You can run a get method. The get method is going to retrieve data from the database and send it back to the front end to display. And also you can post data, which means creation of data. So creation of data is when you are creating a new entry in your database. And we have custom params. So if you check some URL, you will see some queries there. So you can, through REST API, you can pass in query params and queries, and then you can use it to interact with the back end. So this is a visual of a REST API architecture. So the next on our agenda is what is Hoppscotch. So we've discussed about front end, we've discussed about APIs, we've discussed about backend. So now, what if we create an API as a backend developer? How do we test this? How do we test our APIs? So that's where Hoppscotch comes in. Hoppscotch is an API tool that makes API development faster or for free. Hoppscotch is an open source tool which you can use for free, and it is being used by over 500,000 developers monthly, which I am one of them, and you also are going to be one of them, because Hoppscotch is really amazing. And Hoppscotch allows you to run your API tests on their platform. And API testing means that you want to easily test your API before you send it to the front end to consume. So what I mean by consume is use. Before the front end guys use your API, you want to ensure that you test your API. It works well before you send it to the front end, because you don't just want to write your code without testing it. And because the front end is not available now, you don't have any means of testing your API. So with Hoppscotch, you can test your API even without the front end or any UI. So, and on Hoppscotch, you can do teamwork. You can invite your team to come and work on the same API that you are working on. You can collaborate on Hoppscotch with your team and do great things. So the next one is API documentation. These are not the only features that that are available on Hoppscotch, but these are the most important ones that we are going to be using today. So API documentation is when you document everything you've done. We have different endpoints, API endpoints. What I mean by API endpoints means that the logics that we have at the back end, the functions, the routes that we have at the back end, you have to, you front end guys, to be able to make use of your API. Documentation is a guide, is a step-by-step guide for your front end guy or anybody that wants to use your API to implement whatever they want to implement. And Hoppscotch allows you to generate your documentation by just clicking a button. When you click a button, it's going to generate your documentation for you, and which is really, really helpful when you are working with a lot of APIs. Showing you what we are going to be building. So what we are going to be building today is a to-do list backend application. I believe that every one of us are here have in the past created a to-do list using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That is very, very common. And today I'm going to be showing you how you can create a backend for that particular to-do list front end, and then you can also connect the two together and make it a full stack to-do list application. So a to-do list app is a kind of app that is generally used to maintain our day-to-day tasks or list everything that we have to do. So you can use your to-do list application to break down what you are going to achieve today, what you are going to do tomorrow or for the week, the month, and what are the functionalities that we are going to be implementing in our to-do list. So the user should be able to create, read, update, and delete their to-do items. If you remember, these are the things that I mentioned about RESTful API. So we can use the HTTP methods, and we can use the methods that we talked about, updating, puts. We can also make use of them here. So this is like an FRD of what we are going to be building. So what is our task as a backend developer right now? Our task is to create a backend API for the front end to send, retrieve, edit, and trash users to do items. Okay, so that's what we are going to be doing today. So what is our goal? What is our goal? Why are we doing this? The first thing we are going to be looking at is the front end. So we have to actually understand what the front end has, what they prepare in the front end before we start designing our back end. As a backend developer, you should know what the front end needs. You don't just want to create unnecessary data. Maybe they don't need a particular data in the front end, and then you created it in your database. So you are just wasting spaces. So we want to ensure that we know what is going on. So as you can see here, our front end is created with HTML and CSS, and we already said that they should be able to add, delete, and edit entries from the front end. And we are going to be making use of RESTful APIs. These are the technologies that we are going to be using. And RESTful API is the communication between the front end and the back end using URL and HTTP methods such as get, post, patch, and delete. And for the back end is going to receive the request, process the logic, manipulate the database, and return a response back to the front end. So this is what we want to achieve. So in a couple of minutes, you'll be seeing me installing some packages, going to some websites and to get things done. So I just want to give you an overview of what I will be installing. So the first thing is I'm going to be setting up my Node. So Node.js is a runtime environment. If you remember, the code that runs outside of the browser, outside of the browser is running on the server. So how do we now ensure that our JavaScript code is going to run outside of the browser? That's why we need to set up our runtime environment. So Node allows JavaScript to run outside of the browser, and we are going to be setting that up. And the next thing is Express.js. So Express.js is a Node.js framework which is used to easily create APIs. So when I install that, we are just going to be using that to create our application API. And then we have HarperDB. HarperDB is our database for this live session. And HarperDB is very, very cool. It's an hybrid database. You can write your SQL, and you can also write your method, your ORM there. Is very, very interesting. Then Hoppscotch, I've already explained this, is a very cool API testing tool. And I'm going to be showing you how you can also get started with it. Then we proceed to NodeMon. I'm going to be using NodeMon. NodeMon is like an auto refresh for Node apps. So if you are working with VS Code, you know, we have auto refresh for our HTML document. So that live server is what we have as NodeMon. at the back end. So it always refreshes our Node app anytime we make changes to our files. So the last package that I have is going to help us and connect our Node.js application to HarperDB database. So, and we're also going to be installing more, but I just feel I should explain this. So by the time I'm installing it, you will know what is going on. Coding time, and I hope you came with your coffee because this is code and coffee. I have my own coffee here, so let me zip my coffee. Okay, so let's get started to coding. So what we have here, what we are going to be doing today, we have it in an article on Aviyel. So if you want to go back to it later, you can also check it out here, and you can also check it out as I'm going through it. So I'm going to share the, I'm going to link. This is public. Okay, I'm going to share the link here, so you can also check it out whenever you want. So it's available on Aviyel, and you can also check it out on my blog if you want to. So we are going to be using these also. We can make reference to it here. And also the code we are going to be writing, I've already created a gist for you guys on GitHub where you can go to and check it out. And we are also going to be making reference to it, so you can see all the code. And someone has already made use of it. So this is the feedback from the person 7 days ago. So I'm really happy about that. So let's get started into coding. So before we go, let me show you the front end. So I created this front end for you to have a visual of what a to-do list application is all about and what we are going to be creating at the back end. So the way our to-do list application is created in the front end is to take and then it has a status where the user can select from a drop down the status of the to-do. By default, it is pending. Then we have doing, then we have completed. And as you can see here, we have the delete icon here, and we also have the edit. So which means that everything we discuss in our FRID document has been implemented in the front end, and the front end is expecting our endpoint. So what are we waiting for? Let's go and code. Okay, so I already created an empty folder here. So I have an empty folder here. So the first thing you want to do is you want to open up your Git bash. So Git bash is an alternative to CMD on your computer system. So if you are not using Git bash, you can make use of your CMD. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to run a command, which is yarn init. So yarn init is used to create a new package for backend. So it's going to create that package.json file for us, so that we can have access to it. So there are two ways to creating these. You can either use the Y flag, or you can do without it. But if you want to skip some questions, you can use just the Y flag. So, but for this, I'm just going to let's answer some questions so that you can see what it's all about. So it's asking for the project name, so we can do to-do list backend. Okay, okay, so let's say to-do list. Okay, so version by default it is 1.00. Let me increase this a little bit. Okay, so description to-do list API for front end to-do list. Okay, so our entry point is our index.js by default, so we don't have to create that. If you want to add your repository URL, you can add it here also. Author, my name is Unclebigbay. So you can put your name there. So what is the license? So when we are talking about license, is what license are you adding to your project? Do you want other people to be able to contribute to it as open source? And by default, it has MIT, which is a license for open source projects. So there are some projects that if you poke them or you close them or you use their code, you might get arrested for it. So this is an open source, so I'm not going to add any other. Question private, I don't have any, so that's done. So if you want to skip all these questions, you can just run your yarn init with flag Y. So, and it will just create your package.json without any question. So the next thing we are going to do is we are going to run code dot. So code dot is going to open your VS Code. You can also come to your folder and then run open with code, but I've already opened it here. So, and also let me know in the comment section if you want me to create a repository for this front end, if you want to use it. So I've already designed it. So to save you time, I can push it to GitHub and send you guys the URL. So now let's move on. Let's move on. So the first thing we are going to do here is let's check our package.json. So this is our package.json. So you can see all the questions that we answered. You can see them here. So, and you can also add more if you want to. So you can add more here. So this package.json is just like the brain of our backend application, where we install dependencies and other packages. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do here, now that we have set the package.json up, is we are now going to install those packages that we need. So the first thing we are going to install is what we call Express.